I do want to let you know that if you made it here today, you do get extra bonus God points. Next week, we'll all judge the people that weren't here. Apparently, some of us go to church when it's convenient, right? You have to be a certain age to get that joke, by the way. But it's good to be together. I know as I woke up this morning, I love the snow. I just find it to be so calm and peaceful and joyful. And I know it's slippy and all that kind of thing, but I just love the peace that comes and the silence that surrounds us and the change of seasons. And I'm just reminded that we are in a season of joy. And it is almost Christmas, and I'm not quite sure how that happened, but here we are. Apparently, my best denial will not undo what is happening. So I've been grateful to, just wake and enjoy and the peace of the season and the joy of the season and the wonder of the season. And I've been particularly moved as we are celebrating and mourning the life and death of Nelson Mandela. And of course, if you've watched TV at all, you realize that, it's amazing how our media works. When something happens, it's almost as if that's the only thing that happens. But it's a beautiful reminder of the power of an enlightened soul in our world. And so it reminded me as we've been looking at this season of light and the search and the seeking and the finding the Christ within. And here stands a brilliant person who is very human. This is what I always like to emphasize with these things. Nelson Mandela was very human. You watch how quickly we want to sanitize and saintize. I don't know if that's a word, but I like it. Saintize someone. I've done so many memorial services in my life, and it's almost like everybody wants to go, the fact that he beat me and drank, let's just leave that part out. Here's this sainted soul, right? So Nelson Mandela was not a saint by any means. In fact, he was considered a terrorist by our government for many, many years. And yet, he was a simple man with a vision of possibility, believing in equality and justice against all odds. And so it's amazing as people are talking about this man, and he was a radical and went to war with his government, which was unjust, and found himself in prison for a very long time, 27 years. And when he emerged from prison, led a country into a process of truth and reconciliation that really is remarkable when you think about it. I look at the civil rights struggle in our own country and how from the very beginning, there was this problem that we had, and it was a problem that some people wanted to own other people. I don't think that ever works over the long haul, and it certainly hasn't worked in our country. But one of the things that you see in our country was that you had a majority of white people oppressing a minority of black people. In South Africa, however, you had a minority of white people suppressing a majority of black people. And so the fact that Nelson Mandela could emerge from prison, become the president of that country, lead them through leaving apartheid behind and moving into a new way of being, to have the brilliance of mind to understand that the larger picture was the more important thing. You see, we have many examples in our not too distant history of white supremacy being overturned by those who have been oppressed, and then creating dictatorships and creating all kinds of ugliness. But Nelson Mandela caught a vision of possibility. And he caught a vision of that it was not about superiority, it was not about inferiority, it was about brotherhood and sisterhood. And led a nation, had the brilliance of mind to invite that person who had just been the previous president to become his vice president, to put forth an idea of equality, that the nation would move forward together, and then invited the entire nation into a process of truth and reconciliation. Now, the brilliance of this, I believe, in my humble and limited opinion, is that he allowed there to be amnesty for all of the acts on all sides. That, in other words, what's done is done. And then invited a commission of truth. So it was not to deny that bad things happened, but those things that happened, the acts of terror against one another, were expressed, were revealed, and there was reconciliation. There was forgiveness. It's a very, very powerful message. And it reminds me of these great souls who, despite their circumstances, become transcendent. I had originally thought about speaking about the search today, and I will anyways, because it really ties in. You know, Guy Finley says that the truth is that every living thing is searching for something to fulfill itself. Hear that. Every living thing is searching for something to fulfill itself. It is the essence of great nature herself to seek out her own highest possibility. I invite you to consider this morning that there is one life, one power, one infinite being, whatever you choose to call that. Ernest Holmes used to call it the thing itself, or this thing called life. But this thing called life is always seeking its self-expression. It is always seeking its highest possibility. You see, the divine exists as infinite possibility. If you think about in our Christian, or in our not Christian, in our Judaic version of creation, the first one, there's this moment of the divine contemplating itself and saying to itself, "Let there be light." And an explosion of light occurred, and form was made manifest in the world, and creation began. And in that creative process, there was the divine longing to experience itself and needed a vessel and a vehicle through which it could. Think about, before it was all pure potentiality, but in the expression of self, it could experience itself. It's as if you and I, if we were nothing more than the spirit self that we are, if we were nothing more than the spiritual possibility, then we couldn't have the experience of ourselves. But by having skin and having nerve endings, we get to experience touch and taste and feel. We get to have an experience of, the divine gets to have a greater experience of itself through us. And so, is it Emerson that said the divine is in search of an organ for itself? That we are the vessel and the vehicle that allows the divine to experience itself in form and through our expression. So we are all longing, as Khalil Gibran says, that there is life longing, it is life's longing for itself, to experience itself. And so we become the vessel and the vehicle. Now, all of us, from the earliest time, begin to search for something. We have an inner longing that wants to experience life. You watch these beautiful little children that are in our midst, and they start from the very first day. seeking and searching to find meaning and to make sense of what's going on. And they begin to emulate the world that is around them, and they begin to say the things that we say, and they also begin to believe the things that we believe. That may or may not be good news. Right? But there's always a search for itself. And so we, as human beings, go in search of fulfillment. And we think that we will find fulfillment through more form. We often believe that if we can have more money, we will experience abundance. We often think that if we can create a secure life, we will experience peace. We think that if we have the right job, the right car, the right spouse, or the right anything else, then somehow magically we experience fulfillment. But lo, I say unto you. Gonna go all biblical on you now. We've all had the experience of creating the thing that we thought we wanted, to find out that life's pretty much the same as it was before. That the thing that we sought was not the answer. We find that as we become more aware, we become more enlightened, that it is an inner experience. So we can have the experience of wealth and maybe not have the experience of abundance. You see, for abundance is a spiritual quality that recognizes the divine flow. I'm reminded of the story of Mother Teresa, where a person asked her, she's essentially, how do you deal with this poverty that you're around all of the time? And she looked at the questioner, a Westerner, in the eye and said, poverty? Let me tell you something. In my country, in India, if a person has a banana and sees another person who is hungry, they share their banana. But in your country, you have people with many bananas who never share anything. Speak to me of poverty. You see, she could see beyond the appearance of things to understand that unless we are in flow with our good, we have not experienced abundance. She recognized the divine in every person that she saw. So she said, when I'm doing my work, I just simply see the face of the beloved in those whom I serve. Isn't that beautiful? So I was thinking as I've been listening and reading of all these great individuals throughout the ages who've come forward. And I don't know why, but sometimes at 4 o'clock in the morning, God wants to have a conversation with me. And I often say, hello, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, You couldn't call it some civilized time, but no. But so, be that as it is, I got on, and I was moved to, I was reminded of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. This amazing man going through the death camps and surviving that, and not only surviving the experience, but learning from the experience, being a teacher for the experience, and then using that experience to have an influence beyond measure. The time of his death, he'd sold over 10 million books. How many have read or are familiar with Man's Search for Meaning? Of course. This brilliant work. But he said to us, he said something to us. I'll just make up what he said. Here's what he said. Victor, where did you go? Oh, it's a smooth, polished operation we run here, isn't it? He said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. You see, Nelson Mandela came to the same conclusion in his time of solitude. He said to us that man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden, but never extinguished. Hear that. It can be hidden, but never extinguished. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedoms of others. So in his imprisonment came enlightenment, came wisdom, and he had the realization that he would be called upon to be a leader, and he had a choice. But he saw that it was not going to be at the expense of others' freedoms, but in the fulfillment of everyone's freedom. You see, the great spiritual masters have this awareness. I believe it is the message that Jesus had for us as he was helping us to awaken to our true and divine self. So Viktor Frankl realized that there is a part of us that can never, ever be diminished, can never be destroyed. And it is that part of us that can and will become triumphant over the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Hi. We have a loose one. We have one on the loose. Okay. All right, just so we know. Hi. They must be like little children. You see, so Viktor Frankl had that realization, so he was not imprisoned by the circumstances. Nelson Mandela was not imprisoned by his circumstances, for his spirit was free, even though his body was housed. Martin Luther King sat in jail and wrote one of the most beautiful poetic letters of all time, in my opinion, a letter from a Birmingham jail. Mahatma Gandhi was imprisoned, and through the power of nonviolence, through the power of clarity of mind, through the power of clarity of purpose, brought a nation to overthrow what was the most powerful nation in the world at that time, through nonviolence. You see, all of these people recognize that we are more than our circumstances. And yet, I find for some of us, we may never have the experience of going to jail. Or at least for any length of time. Right? And yet, we may experience being in prison. But the prison that we are in is not the prison that is imposed upon us. It is the prison of our own mind, of our own thinking, of our own limitation, which is the scary kind, right? Because it appears to be invisible. And yet we find ourselves limited by the belief in our limitation. You see, the great work of Ernest Holmes, I believe, was to help us to understand that there is a spiritual principle at work, that there is not a God that is rewarding and punishing, but rather there is a spiritual principle that is at work that is fair and honest and just, and that conforms to our own understanding of it. And so Dr. Holmes said to us that we arrive at the conclusion that while bondage is an experience, there is a reality, with capital R, to which bondage is not real. You see, Mandela sat in prison and said, "You can take everything else away from me, but you can't take away my mind and you can't take away my dignity." Same with Viktor Frankl. These great teachers, same with Jesus, who could transcend the experience that was happening to him and seek to be forgiving. I know it's not really the time for the cross talk at this time of year, but imagine people persecuting you, punishing you, crucifying you, and you say, "Father, forgive them," for they know not what they do. That's an enlightened soul that sees beyond the appearance. I realized I could get to the point where I could say, Father, forgive them, for they are stupid. But I've got some work to do, obviously, right? Father, forgive them, they're wrong, right? You know, there's that need that we seem to have as human beings to be right. Sometimes at the expense of our joy and our happiness. We want to be righteous. But those truly humble of spirit, who realize that no one gains unless everyone gains. There's so many passages of Mandela's speaking, Martin Luther King as well, of saying that it is not enough for us just to overcome the injustice. It is about creating justice for all. Yes, we must go through this process, but it has to be inclusive of all people. I find us in a time where we would do well to study these individuals, because in my mind they are the great spiritual teachers of our time. The search that we all have is to understand and to know that divine self. You know, it's kind of an ironic thing that in all of our searching, we look everywhere. I was speaking earlier about the great admiration and respect that I have for those who have found themselves in a 12-step program. I've been privileged to be, I need to learn some of this terminology. I call it in the confession booth, but you know, it's our version of when people have taken their inventory and they need to tell somebody and they go to a trusted person. And I've sat witness to people doing as they unburden their soul and said, you know, I've been a schmuck. It's a beautiful thing. And so what often we don't realize is that is all part of the search. We have all gone in searching for something, and as the great country western song says, searching in all of the wrong places, right? I used to not like country western music, and then I moved to Texas, and before I could help it, I kind of found myself tapping along, and then you kind of go, this is a great song. This is a great story. I'm searching for love in all the wrong places. Been there, right? Of course, my other favorite, one of my favorites is, how can I miss you if you won't go away? Right? But even in that search for the wrong is how we find the right. How many of us would be in this room today had we not made some of the forays into far countries, shall we call it, right? That we searched in the wrong places and we didn't find the fulfillment. So ultimately we thought, okay, well, I'm going to keep going until I find this. Who knew that the last place we would think to look within ourselves is where we would find the peace that we have sought? This teaching helps me and helps us to understand that we are so much more than these physical bodies. Not that there's anything wrong with the physical body. As I said, the skin, you have to have the skin in order to experience the touch, the feel, all of those experiences of this life. But what we need to know is there is something more to us. There's a spiritual dimension to who we are. And it is this dimension that the great teachers through the ages have brought us to. It is this dimension, I believe, that Jesus was trying to help us understand. It is that awakening to the Christ presence that is inherent within all of us, is where we find our peace, our joy, our love. And so as we are in this season of celebration of the life of one, we would do well to remember that this awakening is the awakening for all humanity if we are willing to embrace it, if we are willing to awaken to that greater possibility. Mahatma Gandhi said, you can chain me, you can torture me, you can even destroy this body, but you will never imprison my mind. I love our website address, we all know it's spirituallyfree.org, right? Because when we begin to understand that our freedom lies in our spirit, it never lies in our circumstance. But the great illusion of humanity is that when we get the circumstances right, all will be well. So there is an awakening taking place. Nelson Mandela stands as a reminder to us that there is greatness within us. I was listening to an interview of a gentleman who interviewed him, actually wrote a book, biography of him, Rick Stengel, who was the editor for Time magazine, and he said, the great illusion that you hear everybody say is that Nelson Mandela emerged from prison and had no bitterness. He said that is wrong. He had a lot of bitterness. He had a lot of justifiable anger. 27 years, right? But he had the brilliance and the transcendent quality to never express it, to never show that he was a person that could transcend his own littleness. Like I said, the problem with making these people saints is that we begin to separate them. I like the real stuff. I like the real version. I always say, I want to meet the Jesus that went into the temple and started throwing stuff around. I'd like to meet that guy, because that's a person that I can relate to, right? That gives me hope. That says, you can be a jerk sometimes and still be a transcendent being, right? We all have a capacity for tremendous love, for tremendous compassion, for tremendous good within us. But it is our job to bring that forth. And we do that by searching within our own being to find that place of peace, to find that place of joy. As Mother Teresa said, to be able to see the beloved in all people is a tremendous spiritual gift. So I would invite you to look at where you may be imprisoning yourself. The old ideas that perhaps no longer serve you, the old resentments that we continue to carry around even though they are extremely heavy, the old ways of being that no longer serve us. To say maybe in this season of light is the time to release, to let go, to allow that greater something, and to realize that even as I bring forth my good, it's of nothing unless I bring forth the greater good for all. And that is where the awakening occurs, and that is where we truly experience peace on earth, goodwill for all. Know that wherever you are loved and supported in being fully who you are, of expressing that divine potential. It is good. Let us pray. As we take this moment to simply turn inward, to honor and acknowledge this divine presence, to sense, to feel, and to know that the one life is always seeking its highest self-expression in, through, and as all creation. And so we open our hearts in this moment to the presence of absolute unconditional love. Even as we open our minds to the presence of divine wisdom, we sense and feel and know that we are a part of this one mind, this one life, this one heart, beating itself into existence. There is a sense of peace and calm that moves through our entire being as we recognize and know our inherent divinity. We allow the past to be what was. But in this moment of new creation, in this moment of new possibility, we choose from that highest vantage point that is within us. We see that greater possibility. The possibility of love, of forgiveness, of joy, of peace, as a part of that which we have inherited. And so we move forward into the world, allowing our light to shine brightly. We allow wholeness to reveal itself as health, well-being, vitality. We choose to live the abundant life, generously giving and joyously receiving of the divine bounty. We allow ourselves to be forgiven and to forgive, to open our hearts to the presence, knowing that the face of the beloved is in everyone that we see. So how good it is to stand in this awareness, in this presence, to know that there is nothing to be healed, there's simply a spiritual truth to be revealed. How good it is to know that we are whole, perfect beings right here, right now. And so we move forth with grace, in peace, with a profound sense of joy and gratitude. For we know that we are blessed right here and right now. We give thanks for the many blessings in our lives, and we extend a blessing from this place. We bless this spiritual community, knowing that it is divinely guided, that it is abundantly supplied in doing our good work to lift up the consciousness of humanity. We bless our brothers and sisters around the planet this day. We're simply knowing, sensing and feeling that this is a world that works for everyone. We hold that high vision. We accept a planet at peace. And as always, we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of every faith. For we know there are many pathways to the divine. And wherever there is a conscious realization, there is a revelation. There is an awakening taking place. How good it is to celebrate this pathway, this awareness. And so in gratitude, I'm simply releasing this word into that law of mind that brings forth the highest good for all concerned. In joy and gratitude, then, I simply give thanks, allowing it to be so. As together we say, and so it is.